I'm Ari Melber in for Lawrence O'Donnell. American foreign policy has spent the better part of the last 23 years consumed with Iraq. Two wars started by two President Bushes and backed by many Democrats, and more than two endings to those wars. When the first Gulf War ended with Saddam in power, many conservatives said it wasn't really over. When President George W. Bush declared mission accomplished, many experts knew it wasn't really over. And when President Obama, the most openly anti-war politician to reach the White House in a generation, when he actually took the harder step of extracting our troops from Iraq, he was basically the first president to tell Americans the hard truth about Iraq, that we can only end our involvement there, but not the war itself. That line has been tested this week, a tough week, as Iraq's civil war deepens, and many are calling for some sort of third American war there. That's the context for today, when the president did something else that's very difficult. He assigned himself a political task no politician would want. He leveled with the public about why we are not going back in. That kind of leadership is also stoking an important development that you might miss amidst all the usual hawkish rhetoric that comes out at these times. Not only has the public come around to the president's view, but so are many conservatives, at least the ones who can afford to. What we've seen this week is that some of the most visible disagreements with the president comes from the politicians he's already beaten, or from political hacks who view reflexive Obama opposition as some kind of occupational requirement.
Frankly, I grow a little tired of this. Well, Americans are war-weary. Do you think the Americans weren't war-weary after World War II and North Korea invaded South Korea and Harry Truman said, look, we're going to stop this, and we lost, I believe, 30,000 dead, and I don't know how many wounded, but it requires a president who will sit in the Oval Office and look into the camera and say, my fellow Americans, what's happening in Iraq and Syria today is a direct threat to the United States of America. These are the pictures of the slaughter that's taken place. These are the atrocities that are going on. And these are the things that these people have said. That when I was at New York, we are next, or something like that, one of their guys said.
Here's the thing about all this. It's easy to look into a camera and talk tough. That's what most politicians do instead of developing any actual foreign policy strategy here. Complaining about radical Islam or pledging never to negotiate with anyone is easy, and it doesn't require any details about the religious civil war ripping through Iraq and Syria right now. Now, that's exactly the tack Senator Ted Cruz took on the Senate floor just today.
Choices inevitably leave us with bad options. Refusing to recognize the radical religious extremism of individuals who are committed to jihad and have pledged to murder Americans is a bad choice. Refusing to utter the words radical Islamic terrorists is a bad choice. Negotiating with terrorists to release terrorist leaders is a bad choice. And considering any kind of deal with Iran is a very bad choice. In the last 5 years, America has receded from leadership in the world. And into that vacuum have stepped nations like Iran, like Russia, like China.
He is really something else. And that is what the occupational Obama opponent's argument looks like. At the White House today, though, the president didn't waste time on tough talk. We already know he opposes radical Islamic terrorists because he's been ordering killings and prosecutions against them whenever warranted. And he didn't duck the fact that so many of our heroic soldiers died in a country that we shouldn't have invaded and that we were right to depart from. He confronted those scars directly, and then he told Americans why the facts still counsel against further intervention in Iraq.
Recent days have reminded us of the deep scars left by America's war in Iraq. Alongside the loss of nearly 4,500 American patriots, many veterans carry the wounds of that war and will for the rest of their lives. Here at home, Iraq sparked vigorous debates and intense emotions in the past, and we've seen some of those debates resurface. But what's clear from the last decade is the need for the United States to ask hard questions before we take action abroad, particularly military action. So the most important question we should all be asking, the issue that we have to keep front and center, the issue that I keep front and center, is what is in the national security interests of the United States of America. As Commander-in-Chief, that's what I stay focused on. As Americans, that's what all of us should be focused on.
What all of us should be focused on, and this is where some small sliver of good news does come in. More people are focusing on that harder policy goal. The architect of the surge, General David Petraeus, spoke out against deploying our Air Force on behalf of one side in a religious civil war.
This cannot be the United States being the Air Force for Shia militias or a Shia on Sunni Arab fight. It has to be a fight of all of Iraq against extremists.
It's even happening over on Fox News. Last night, Megyn Kelly got a lot of attention when she told Dick Cheney he'd been wrong about parts of the war. And tonight, a Fox military expert offered some advice to Bill O'Reilly that we really could have used during the Bush administration. Just say no to meddling in religious civil wars.
You do not get in the middle of a Shia-Sunni war again.
All right, I got
that. Period. You don't do it. We lose a couple of Special Forces guys. We get a plane shot down. We're up to our eyeballs again. No.
Glenn Beck feels the same way.
Enough is enough. Bring them home. Period.
Period. Joining me now, Eugene Robinson, MSNBC analyst and columnist for The Washington Post, and Rajiv Chandrasekaran, a senior correspondent, associate editor for The Washington Post. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Eugene, what do you make of this cleavage that I'm talking about? Basically, we have a distinction between the elected Obama opposition types and other wings of conservative thought here who want to take this foreign policy question seriously.
Well, I think you had it pretty much right, Ari. When you know they're the opportunists, right? They're the Ted Cruzes of the world who just kind of get up and blather, and then there are critics like John McCain, for example, who's bringing up the example of the Korean War, and I suppose that's an option, right? We could have, if we chose to have, another big Iraq war that would involve, I guess, another invasion or huge numbers of U.S. troops to kind of push the two warring sides apart. If you reject that, then it's very difficult, and I think honest conservatives and critics have, or usual critics have come to this point. It's very difficult to find a course of action that's likely to bring success or a better result.
Yeah, and Rajiv, when you look at that, what you have from a lot of the Republicans who do want to make hay here is some sort of vague assumption that military might increases American influence. That's just not always the case. Many experts feel that the way military might was used here ultimately weakened our standing. And you always have capacity issues, even if you are a super-duper power. And yet what you hear from Senator McConnell here that I'm about to play is the idea that military might projected will always serve our interests. Take a listen.
I believe that we, as a superpower without imperialistic aims, have a duty to help maintain an international order and a balance of power, not out of altruism, but out of national interest. And I believe that international order is best maintained through American military might. In fact, I believe that American military might forms its very backbone.
I mean, Rajiv, if you take him at his word there, the idea is that he's got some mythical opponent who doesn't believe in military might. That's not the question today, right? The question is, do we want to go back and do a third Iraq war?
Well, it makes for a great soundbite, but let's play out a quick bombing campaign like some of the Republican members of Congress want. What do? You essentially wind up empowering the radical Shiite elements of Iraq's government. That's doing Iran's bidding. They certainly don't want that, but getting into the complex dynamics of a civil war, which the president rightly tried to lay out today, and I think his policy is aimed aimed at trying to address. Well, that makes it a little too complicated for quick, sound bites on TV from members of Congress. And so you get calls for a policy that ultimately aren't going to serve America's interest.
And Eugene, what do you make of the fact that the president clearly is making remarks here and trying to level with the public in a way that is not politically easy? Interestingly, George W. Bush always wanted credit for that when the war was unpopular. Here, nobody wants to go back in, so the policy outcome is not the risk. And yet, as soon as you do what he did today, you talk about the lives lost, you talk about the guilt collectively that we feel and not going in, people don't want to have that conversation.
Well, yeah, but I think what the president was trying to do was put it all out on the table and say, look, everybody is going to feel bad about this. Nobody feels good about the options that we have. Nobody feels good about the American lives that were lost in Iraq. Nobody wants to feel that those lives were lost in vain. But by the same token, nobody's got a good idea as to some military action we could take now that would even perhaps preserve a unitary Iraq, much less in the conflict that has, that's coming out of Syria and this whole mess of a region right now. And I think the president was just leveling with the American people. What a concept.
Yeah. And Rajiv, where does it go from here? Do you see a further breakup in crisis?
Well, I think the real path forward is a diplomatic one. There's a moment of opportunity here. It may be a slim window, but Iraq had national elections. They are now in a process of forming a new government, and there's a period of horse trading coming up in Baghdad. Can the Iraqis come together? Can the major factions of that country come together and essentially form a new government that does not involve President Maliki at the head of it? Can other Shiite politicians coalesce around a rival candidate who will be more inclusive, who will seek to bring the Sunni Arabs in and then get them to turn against these al-Qaeda militants who have flooded into the country? I think there's a possibility there, and this is where the president's strategy is headed, and this is essentially trying to complete what President Bush was supposed to have done with the troop surge. The troop surge was not about just sending in more forces there. It was about trying to get political compromise there.
Right, and trying to have something that you could get buy-in for. I know the president also mentioned today he is going to send Secretary Kerry to the region, so that may be part of what they're also working on. Rajiv Chandrasekaran and Eugene Robinson, thank you both.